So anyway, Charles Betz was willing to bring a talk for us that he's going to be doing at a conference in Australia, I believe it is. You can talk
It's
into
true,
the mic.
yes.
It's on.
Yep.
But yeah, so if you want to say hi, tell us about yourself, and give yourself your 5 minutes and go. It'll be exciting.
All right. I'm Charlie Betz. I think I've spoken here before briefly. I'll be delivering this lightning talk in Australia next week for the IT Service Management Forum meeting in Brisbane. Looking forward to my first travel to Asia, and it should be interesting. I was very grateful for the opportunity to practice a little bit here. I was even more grateful when Bridget said that I didn't have to use the strict auto timer. It might be closer to 7, but I will try to, I need to be snappy, so I get it. I don't use the term major transformation lightly. I don't like exaggerating, but I believe we are in the middle of major transformation. In some ways, this building and these DevOps meetings are the epicenter of a major transformation in digital delivery that is starting to echo around the state, around the city, around the state, in regions that might surprise you. And one of the things that we're seeing is that the old ways of understanding digital delivery are starting to lose some of their favor. I said ITIL tonight, and oh boy, the shudder that I got, was quite notable. So what I propose is that we need a new map for understanding. We need a new map of how this all fits together so that we can train, so we can learn, so we can teach, so we can help guide. Right now we're dealing with some very fragmented guidance. ITIL, COBIT, PMBOK, TOGAF, all of this alphabet soup, none of it brings it all together. Now we have DevOps and Agile challenging. What are we going to do with this? Well, I propose what I'm using in my courses is an emergence model, and I should have introduced myself a little bit more, but I wanted to get to the meat of it. I do teach at the University of St. Thomas as well as consult. And I've used this thought experiment with some success with my students. The thought experiment is from startup to enterprise, and you don't have to actually be in a startup, but it's this thought progression of what's the bare minimum viable thing you need, and then the exercise of moving through thinking as a team of teams, which is where you hit the big ugly scaling problem, and ultimately as an enterprise, and asking yourself, well, why would we need a process? Why would we need a dedicated team? Why does that emerge now? What are the drivers? And I think that this has been a very helpful way about thinking, how do we bring some of these things like project and process management together with this new world? So as a founder, for example, your world is very pragmatic, and I fault some of the current guidance. It gets a little bit too far away from the coal face, as they would say in the UK, too far away from the actual work being done. It all boils down to what's your digital value, and what infrastructure, what tools are you going to use, and what are you going to build on top of it. And when it's you and your best friend forever in a garage, that's all you can afford to think about. You sure as heck aren't thinking about some advanced process framework. You are thinking about minimum viable products, you're thinking about teaching, learning, delivering, and pivoting ultimately, and that's all you have time for. But then if you get big enough, I'm getting ahead of myself here, you have to decide on your tools, you have to decide on the minimum viable platform that will support the minimum viable product, and of course infrastructure as code, who would do anything else nowadays? And then you can ultimately get to that continuous delivery pipeline, test-driven development. Why do you want faster delivery? Because you need fast feedback. Regardless of when your actual external releases are, the way you understand your product and its success is through continuous iteration and fast feedback. I know that this is not news to many of you here, but work with me. As we move forward, you get to the team. Now, if you're the person who was in the garage, you're now talking to investors and customers. You have yourself got a team back in the garage. Well, how do you know that the team is going to do the right thing? They may be very good at doing the thing right, but you have a problem of time and space shifting. You need formal product management, and none of the current guidance goes into formal product management. Scrum touches on it a bit, but for the most part, this is something that we are struggling with. How do we even start to teach this? And then you need you still don't need, keep ITIL out of the room, keep the heavyweight process management out of the room, but you need some basic ability to track work, and I would strongly recommend you start working into your DNA, limit work in process, right? And then operations management does not ever go away. I call it the interrupt-driven work. As your product succeeds, becomes increasingly complex, we start to run into the problems that Sidney Decker points out. Complex systems, it's a miracle that they run at all. Certainly not something where we hold people accountable because a complex human socio-technical system failed. No, blameless postmortems, absolutely. And then you hit the hard one, the team of teams, the very, very hard scaling problem. Now, I have wrestled with how to even talk about this. Originally, I had project management where it says investment and process management where it says execution. I shopped that around to some people at Agile Alliance in Georgia, and they were like, no, you can do better than that. So this is my current proposal. You have multiple products. How are you going to invest? How are you going to execute the work across multiple teams? Ultimately, though, the number one priority, protect your team delivery. And that's where the current frameworks fall down. They tend to not protect that core essential team delivery. So you have to start thinking formally about cultural and organization, another area where the current frameworks and IT management guidance completely falls flat. So are you going to use the Spotify model? Not a bad start. How are you going to actually cultivate a learning organization where people's first reaction is to go and see? Who here's read Toyota Kata? Awesome book, right? Then you have limited funds and multiple priorities for investment. You're no longer in the garage where the core product gets all the money, right? It's easy then when you're in the garage and you just got one team and one product. Very simple. Now you got to slice that dollar. Well, for better or for worse, project management has been one of the answers for how to solve that problem. And I'm not ready to completely throw out the baby with the bathwater. You've got to solve the investment problem. But how are you making the investments? From the highest paid person's opinion, or are you using something a little more scientific like Spotify's data insight, belief, and bet process? Execution. We tend to over-specify processes, organizational scar tissue. I'm seeing a whoop for Don Reinertson. You don't need, case management. You need maybe larger grained, lighter weight processes, but processes are still a thing. And then every time somebody says, oh, it's more efficient, your number one response is, yeah, but how effective is it? I consulted for a company, a very large company you all know, and I saw in their highest level KPIs the word efficiency at least a dozen times and the word effectiveness, not at all. And you all know this company. And then finally at the enterprise level, all these external stories that start to intrude, external factors, external forces, concerns like board of directors, audit committees, those also don't go away. We cannot pretend that they are not there. Governance, however, governance and security, automated is auditable, the DevOps Audit Survival Toolkit. I may have that title wrong. It's an awesome book. And then ultimately, here's the great irony I'll propose to you. When you talk to somebody who's really bought into project and process management, they will often say, well, we just need to have less risk. My question to them is, what if your heavyweight process and project management approaches are actually increasing risk? That is a very troubling thought for most people who are bought into the older style. And yet, when you have waterfall processes, you have reviews and checkers checking checkers. Tell me how that's not putting your investment capital at risk when you're imposing all kinds of cost of delay. Information I'll gloss over a little bit here, but that whole conversation about what do you actually mean by that, that's a hard conversation, especially at scale when you've got hundreds of different services. And records management, e-discovery, all important things, you can't get past those. Ultimately, architecture, hey, self-identified recovering architecture here, not going away. Technical debt exists, it's a problem, but ultimately we've got to get those architects out of the ivory tower. There's a lot of different ways that they can do that. Certainly architecture is experimental, not a mandate. And so I'll just leave you with, this actually is, I am writing a book. This, in some ways is the outline of the book. I would suggest again that this is applicable for any journey. You don't have to take the startup metaphor literally, but hopefully this is a useful framework for thinking about some of these questions of large-scale digital delivery that I know we're all struggling with in this current time. Thanks very much.